Bonjour à tout le monde, je m'appelle Laura et c'est sur mon channel de YouTube Les langues avec Laura et aujourd'hui je veux parler de les ressources pour apprendre des langues. Hello everyone, my name is Laura and this is my channel Languages with Laura, and today I'm going to talk about language learning resources. Having good resources can really make or break your language learning. Not that you can't learn it, but it makes it so much easier and so much faster, and you can be so much more confident if you have good resources and a good setup for language learning. So I'm going to talk about how I gather my resources, what I look for, and what I recommend when gathering resources for learning a language. And this is going to be a general overview for this should work for virtually any language. Some languages are much harder to gather resources for than others, just depending on how many different materials there are. It might be a lot easier to learn English or Romance languages or some of the more popular languages, while others might not be as easy. So I'm trying to do a general overview for any and all languages, but just know that some languages may be more or less available. Let's get started. One thing that's very important to keep in mind is to have a good balance of resources. So I wouldn't say have one main resource and that's it. You want to be able to balance it, but you also don't want to have like 5, 6, 7 amount of resources, because that is just too much. You will be overwhelmed, you won't have time to do them all, and it can burn you out pretty quickly. So to have a good balance of 2, 3 is kind of more what I would recommend, depending on how good these resources are for your independent learning style. I would recommend only having a couple that you trust. So for me, there are 3 different types of resources that I like to collect before learning any language. One is going to be my main resource. A lot of times I use textbooks for this because it has vocab and grammar and practice most of the time, but it does not have to be a textbook. And this includes both physical textbooks and online textbooks. I just personally like textbooks because they have been published, they have been reviewed, and I can typically find them in bookstores or even in libraries, or like I said, online. They are fairly easy to find and they are very much meant for you to learn the language. Most textbooks are for somebody learning the language who already speaks the language, but in my Mandarin class, our teacher actually gave us a Mandarin textbook for Chinese children. So there's also that you can keep in mind. However, that was a one-time thing in my experience. I haven't found a lot of textbooks like that, but although I did have a Russian teacher who tried to do that as well. It didn't work as well as the Mandarin one did, but just keep that in mind when you're looking. I really prefer to get my textbooks based off of other people recommendations, either from my friends or professors, or even like on the internet. If someone's like, I use this textbook and it works really well, I am more likely to gravitate towards that specific textbook. And there are some that are like publish multiple textbooks in multiple languages that are very much renowned, like in the US, the McGill or McGraw textbooks for language learning tend to be very widely regarded on a high level. Those I have found to be very well, and I've used them in my classes. So I always do my textbooks based off of recommendation. But again, your main resource does not have to be a textbook. It's honestly better, if that is not your language learning style, to go with something else. For example, YouTube. Find a YouTube channel that teaches the language. There are lots of native speakers who love to teach their language, or language teachers who create YouTube channels to help their students, but they are public and open. So finding a good YouTube channel, I find this to be very helpful, especially for explaining grammar, because I have a hard time learning grammar from a textbook. So grammar, you can hear how a word is pronounced if you don't have the virtual version of a book or an audio accompaniment. And you can also get examples. So that's an option. Some people prefer podcasts. Those are great. I would just say it really depends on what your language learning style is, and to make sure you have enough material. For example, having a textbook, it's nice to know that you'll have a beginner, intermediate, and advanced, or a YouTube channel, one that is very far along and or still releasing videos, rather than starting a series and then realizing that it stops partway through and you're not going to learn everything that you had hoped and they're no longer uploading. Same with the podcast. So just keep in mind that you have one main source that you can stick with for the majority of learning the basics of the language and beyond. My second resource recommendation is something for practice or immersion if you can. So these are things like music, television, TV shows, movies, books, or a person, a friend, someone, either a study buddy or a native speaker that you know to help you. This is just to hear it, to speak it, to practice it in a low stress environment, something that gets you familiar with the language, that gets you immersed in the culture just a little bit more than a textbook or another resource would. And then the third resource type is one that provides correction. Sometimes, again, textbooks will provide answers in the back so that you can go back and correct your exercises, but I think it's really, really important to make sure that you have some sort of figuring out mistakes you're making and how to fix them. So again, textbook, or it could be an app or a website, something that's going to give you immediate feedback, as well as a person, a tutor, a teacher, someone like that. There are lots of websites out there that have tutors, but there are also websites out there that are just for learning the language and not necessarily with a live person. Some of these resources can cross over with each other. Your main resource can also work for your immersion, but I do think it's important to have at least 2, if not 3, different main resources for learning that language. And if it's something like a YouTube channel is one of them, again, 1 or 2 channels. Don't overwhelm yourself with a whole bunch of channels. I mean, it can be fun if you have one for grammar, one for immersion, if you follow an influencer in that language. That would work, but don't overwhelm yourself with resources, but definitely have more than one. So your main resource for learning, your immersion or practice resource, and your feedback resource. That's how I like to categorize them for myself. And then, of course, along with that, it's very important to organize your resources and your notes. Make sure you have your resources in a place that is easily accessible to you. So if they're online, I like to put them in my bookmarks tab under the language. So I know if I'm going to sit down and study French, then I can just go to the French tab and I can see the YouTube channel, Spotify playlist, whatever it is. Having that there so that my resources are organized and together, and having organized notes as well. I like to have a practice notebook and a notes notebook so that I have space to write, make corrections, make it all messy and not quite as neat, but then I do have a notebook that is neat that I can reference as needed. So that's, again, how I like to take notes. Everybody takes notes differently, everybody learns differently, and that is perfectly fine, but I just want you to be sure that you are learning smartly and not struggling through it. So have organized notes, have good resources. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. Comment down below what are some of the types of resources you use, mostly ones that I mentioned, or if you have other resources or ideas of how to help study your language and just anything else that you thought about this video. I love to hear your language goals and your progress, so please keep giving me those updates in the comments. If you like material like this, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified as I try and post on Mondays, or at least 1 video a week. And I do language learning and travel content, so hit the subscribe. And until I see you all in the next video, happy language learning. Au revoir.